The air was thick with smoke, every breath tasting of metal and dust. Somewhere beneath the splintered beams, a faint cough broke the silence. I pulled away a slab of concrete, my gloves shaking. A boy lay curled in the shadows, his skin streaked with soot, an arm wrapped around a charred, melted doll. His eyes opened, glassy, unblinking. "She told me you'd come too late," he whispered, voice cracking. I froze. The doll, it wasn't his. In the faded stitching on its dress, a single name, Sarah. And the world went silent. The infirmary tent hummed with that tired hospital sound, machines breathing for the room, soft footfalls, a curtain flicking once, twice, as if undecided. My boots left a chalk of dried dust with every step. The boy was a small shape on the cot, the kind that makes time move slower. He held the doll to his chest like it would float him through the air if he let go. A nurse tried a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Vitals are stable. He won't eat." She set down a plastic tray, rice gone cold, a puck of bread, a paper cup of water trembling as if afraid to spill. "No wounds. Shock. You know the drill." Another smile, the kind people give when they're leaving. She drew the curtain and the tent dimmed to the color of smoke. He stared past me, the way people look at fire after it has already taken what it wants. The doll's dress, once pink, was now a map of ash and melted threads. The seams had tightened like scars. His fingers locked around it, small knuckles white. I sat on the metal stool and waited for my weight to settle. The cot creaked in reply, a tiny apology. We breathed together for a while, like we were listening for the same ghost. I could hear the outside, rain tapping on tarps, generators coughing, someone calling inventory, the city rearranging its grief. "You're safe," I said softly, the useless script we all start with. "You're here." He didn't blink. A thin ring of soot clung to his lashes like winter on a fence. I pushed the tray closer, nudged the bread with the back of a spoon. "Just a bite," I tried, and hated how it sounded, like a bargain with a locked door. He pulled the doll closer, pressed his face into the stiff, burned cloth as if it could still smell like something other than smoke. A doctor came with a flashlight and checked pupils, checked pulse, checked a world I couldn't see. "No trauma we can find," she murmured to me, then to the chart. "Temperature's down. Shock is a blanket, don't yank it. Let him keep whatever he's holding." Her hand brushed the doll, paused. "We catalog later." She left as quietly as she came. We were alone again in the tremble of light. I leaned forward until the cot's steel bar tapped against my knee. "What's your name?" I asked. Silence. The boy's throat moved once, twice, like he'd swallowed a nail. "I'm Daniel," I said, because names sometimes make a bridge where sentences drown. "I heard you under the beams." I swallowed the taste of concrete that memory brought back. "You did good. You held on." His eyes slid to me, not all the way, then back to somewhere my words couldn't reach. The way grief makes its own hallway and walks you down it. He shifted and the doll tilted, a soft thud on his rib where its plastic face had cracked. The crack had a line, like a river that had changed its mind about where it wanted to go. I reached for the water, unsnapped the lid so gently it felt like a prayer. "Can you try? One sip." He stared at my hand. Not the cup. My hand. My fingernails black with what used to be a roof, a wall, a life. I cleaned them and they stayed dirty. There's a kind of mess that knows how to hide. He didn't take it. I set it down and leaned back, hands flat on my thighs. The tent's canvas breathed with the wind. Somewhere, someone laughed just once and stopped, like they had startled themselves. Minutes pass differently in a room where someone won't speak. They stretch and then contract, like a scar that's learning your skin. I glanced at the doll because sometimes the smallest thing takes the shape of a map. The dress had a stitched hem, thread melted into hard pearls. Along the seam at the arm, the fabric had split and been crudely tied back together with something darker than thread. I raised my hand, slowed it, let him see what I meant to do before I did it. "Can I look?" I asked. He held still. No nod. No flinch. Just still. I took that as a permission made of mercy. I didn't lift it away from him, just tilted its arm toward the light. At the edge of a burned sleeve, near the stiff elbow, the fabric gave up a secret, a tiny shallow carving in the plastic, one letter, careful and hesitant. An S. It wasn't cut in rage. It was cut like a promise. I felt my chest go tight, a rib catching on a memory. Sarah. The name stitched into the dress. The letter here like a companion to the word there. Somebody wanted this doll to speak when they wouldn't, or couldn't. I looked up at him. "Is this hers?" I whispered. He didn't move. His fingers pressed into the doll's shoulder, and he blinked slowly once. The cot breathed with him. "Okay," I said, "the way you do when a door opens a crack and you pretend you didn't see it move." "Okay." I slid the doll back to the angle he had chosen, every motion obedient. He let out a breath so soft it felt accidental. The rain grew steadier outside, 1,000 small knuckles tapping the roof. Tap tap. Tap. He matched it without knowing, his thumb against the doll's wrist, a small rhythm that didn't ask for attention. Tap. 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 "Do you know where she is?" I asked, and the question felt like a stone placed on a river, testing if it would hold. The boy's face didn't change, but something in the air did, like a chord struck just out of hearing. I waited. He opened his mouth a fraction and closed it. The rain answered for him. Tap. 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 We let the silence be a room of its own. My thoughts ran through the wreckage. The pocket of air under collapsed beams where I found him. The doll, the stitching, the letter. That first sentence under tons of concrete, "She told me you'd come too late." Too late for what? Too late for whom? I tried again, smaller. "Did she tell you anything else?" He turned his head then, all the way, and looked at me properly. Not through me. Not past me. At me. His eyes were the color of river water after a storm, mud, sky, the suggestion of depth. His voice, when it came, had the texture of paper that's been folded and unfolded too many times. She said. He stopped, swallowed, the muscles in his jaw quivering with the effort to cross the distance between thought and sound. She said if I told you, you'd find her. The tent went quiet in a new way, like it had been listening and now it had an answer it didn't know what to do with. I didn't move. The sentence hung there, the light slowing around it. If you told me, I repeated softly, as if repetition could make it gentler, I'd find her. He blinked, a tear not falling, just brightening his eye like a small admission of water. He pressed the doll's face to his chest and I heard the faintest plastic creak. I wanted to promise 1,000 impossible things. I wanted to say I will, I swear it, I'll bring her back from whatever edge she's standing on. But his first words had already warned me about promises and time. Can you tell me her name? I asked, though I already knew what the dress said. His mouth moved around the syllables like they were cold. No sound came out. He pulled his shoulders in, the way people do when they're trying to keep the warmth they have. I didn't push. He had given me enough. I stood slowly, knees sounding older than I felt, and adjusted the blanket over his legs. He didn't flinch at my hand, and that felt like a kind of permission too. I looked once more at the letter on the doll's arm, at the way it sat like a compass needle fixed to north. I'm going to look, I said. Not a promise. A plan. I'll be back. As I reached the curtain, the rain hushed suddenly, as if the sky had taken a breath. Daniel? The boy's voice was so small I thought I imagined it. I turned. His lips worked around a word until it found its shape. Hurry. The word slid across the room and anchored itself in me. I let the curtain fall back into place. Outside, the camp returned to noise, the rattle of trays, the cough of engines, the human insistence of continuing. I carried the sound of his tapping with me. Tap. 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 Like a countdown that refused to say what number it would end on. In my pocket, my fingers closed around nothing, a fist made of resolve. The doll's carved S sat behind my eyes, glowing faintly, a small, stubborn star. Somewhere, a spoon struck a metal rim. Somewhere, a radio stuttered. Somewhere, a city waited under its own weight, making room for secrets. I walked into the gray between tents, the boy's last word trailing me like breath on cold air. Hurry. The street where I'd found him was unrecognizable now. No smoke, no shouts, just a cold, wind-scraped silence that made the ruined buildings look abandoned for years instead of days. The rain had washed away the top layer of dust, but not the smell beneath it, wet ash, scorched wood, that strange metallic tang disasters leave behind. I stepped over a tangle of rebar and ducked under the half-collapsed doorway. The skeletal remains of the house groaned with each gust, wood and steel shifting as if reluctant to let me in again. My boots crunched over glass, then over something softer, pages from a children's book, swollen and curling at the edges, their colors melted into watercolor shadows. The place felt empty in the way a grave feels empty. But the boy's words, "She said if I told you, you'd find her," still rattled inside my ribs, refusing to let the silence win. I followed what was left of the hallway, tracing the same path I'd taken during the rescue. The collapsed beams I'd lifted that day were gone, cleared by cleanup crews. But here, under the jagged gap in the floor, something caught my eye, a square outline in the dirt, just wide enough for a person to crawl through. I knelt, my gloves brushing away mud and bits of shattered tile until my fingers found the edge of a hatch. A basement door. The kind built into the floor, once hidden under a rug or table. The hinges were rusted, but someone had tried to pry it open, marks from a crowbar, fresh enough that rust hadn't yet claimed them. The latch was stuck. I had to shoulder it twice before it gave, the hatch slamming open with a groan that seemed too human. A cold breath rose from below. I leaned into the dark, my flashlight carving narrow slices of light along the walls. The basement was small, half storage, half survival space. The walls were concrete, damp and sweating. The first thing I saw was a metal shelf tipped sideways, its jars of pickles and preserves smashed across the floor, glass mixed with pale green pulp. Then I saw the scratches. At first, I thought they were cracks in the wall, but no, these were horizontal marks, uneven and desperate. Fingernail marks. Dozens of them, some deep enough to leave behind small curls of concrete dust. I imagined hands clawing here in the dark, each scrape a plea no one heard. My throat tightened. I stepped carefully, my beam catching on something in the corner, a child's shoe, small and white once, now gray and warped by water. One lace was torn, the other still knotted. I bent to pick it up, the rubber sole cold against my palm. The size was too small for the boy. There was a pipe along the far wall, thick enough to carry water or gas. A faint rust-brown smear clung to its surface. I didn't want to guess what it was. The floor had puddled where rainwater seeped in through the broken foundation. In the still water, I saw floating fragments, fabric, paper, something that looked like part of a bracelet. I fished it out with the end of my flashlight, a thin metal chain, delicate, bent almost into a circle. On the clasp, a faint engraving. The letter S. I closed my fist around it, the cool metal pressing into my palm. The boy's doll. The carved letter. Now this. She'd been here. Long enough to leave traces. Long enough for hope to feel like a cruel joke. I took one slow lap of the basement, searching for anything else. That's when my light hit the stairs. The top 3 steps were gone, splintered and broken, as if something heavy had crashed through. But the rest were intact, leading up to a trapdoor I didn't recognize. I climbed halfway before I realized the truth. This second exit led to the side of the house, hidden from the street, buried under debris when I arrived that day. I pushed at the trapdoor. It didn't budge. I shoved harder, the wood groaning, then giving way with a sharp crack. The daylight above was blinding for a second. I pulled myself through into the overgrown backyard, the cold air burning my lungs. The grass here was flattened in places, as if someone had been lying in it. Not recently, rain had washed away most signs. But my mind stitched the image anyway, a girl, clutching her doll, waiting for help that didn't come. I stood there for a long moment, the bracelet heavy in my pocket. On the way back to my truck, I took the long route, circling past the street corner where the rescue logs claimed this block had been cleared. I found the spray-painted symbols on the houses, orange X's, each one marking, searched. But her house had none. No paint. No mark. It wasn't an oversight. It was avoidance. That night, I pulled up the official rescue logs on my terminal. The report for her address was flagged, cleared, no occupants. Signed off at 14:32 on the day of the disaster. I wasn't there until 1700 hours. Somebody had lied. I leaned back in my chair, the rain tapping the roof like the boy's fingers had tapped the doll. Tap. 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 And for the first time since I'd found him, I wasn't just thinking about saving a girl. I was thinking about finding the person who didn't want her saved. The record's trailer smelled like wet cardboard and coffee left too long on a hot plate. A strip of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting the room in the kind of pallor that made everyone look a little guilty. Stacks of forms leaned like tired men on a late bus. The generator coughed, recovered, coughed again. Outside, rain stitched the canvas seams together and dripped slow tears down the plastic windows. I signed the log, kept my voice neutral. Terminal 3 free? The clerk didn't look up from his clipboard. If the mouse works, it's yours. Terminal 3's mouse had been taped at the neck with blue electrical tape, an improvised brace. I woke the screen, brushed dust from the keyboard, and pulled up the incident management system. The login prompt blinked like a metronome. Tap. 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 I typed. The dashboard unfolded in blocks of muted color. Incident numbers, timestamps, addresses. I entered the girl's street, the house number, the sector code. The record appeared, green flagged, cleared, no occupants. Timestamp, 14:32 on day 1. Assigned team, Bravo 8. Supervisor, Lieutenant Hart. Cross-confirm, drone sweep 1448. Notes, front and rear access obstructed. Thermal negative. Proceeded to next structure. Thermal negative. I could still feel the breath that rose out of that basement, cold, stale, human. Negative. I clicked the drone link. A low-res still of the block appeared, the image flattened by the rain. Trees whipped like paintbrush strokes. The house's roof was already a broken jaw. No infrared overlay, no heat mapping. Just a picture snapped through weather and called evidence. The notes had a radio log attached. I put in my earbuds, pressed play. Static, then a voice, calm, procedural. Bravo 8 to command. Sector cleared. Negative occupancy at listed address. Moving on. I stopped the recording and stared at the wall. A thumbprint of gray had been smeared there by someone's sleeve, a crescent like a fossilized bruise. I found myself rubbing the bracelet in my pocket, the cold curve of metal catching my skin. The engraving, a tiny S, bit gently into my palm, an alphabet willing to bleed. Lieutenant Hart's office was 2 doors down, a plywood cube wedged into the end of the trailer. His door was open, a paper topographic map pinned crooked behind him with pushpins that didn't match. He had a way of sitting like a man trying to seem relaxed in a chair that had made up its mind. "Sir," I said, stepping into the threshold, "not enough to be in, not far enough to be out. Got a minute?" He kept writing for a beat, capped his pen, folded his hands. "Make it half. I'm reviewing a clearance on Jackson and 3rd. 229 Jackson. Logged cleared at 14:32 day 1 by Bravo, 8. No search mark on the structure. No paint. No entry on the door list. Paint crew lagged," he said. "Happens when everything's on fire. Thermal scans a static photo. No overlay." He shrugged a shoulder. "Equipment fails. Weather. There's a basement hatch." I tried to keep the heat out of my voice and failed. "Hidden under debris. Trapdoor out to the yard. We didn't open it." Hart's eyes flicked to the map behind me, then back. And I pulled a bracelet with an initial down there. I placed it on the edge of his desk, the chain a bent circle, a hesitation. I found fingernail scratches in the concrete. Someone was there. Small. She didn't leave marks on the door because we never made a mark on the door. He frowned at the bracelet like it was a bug that had flown in. "You're bringing me jewelry now?" "I'm bringing you a contradiction." Hart leaned back, chair squealing. He picked up the bracelet, turned it under the light, set it down again. "We cleared hundreds of structures that day," he said, the words coming out in a tired cadence he had used before. "We made calls based on safety. You know this. You've made those calls." "This isn't a call," I said. "This is a lie." He sighed in a way that made me feel juvenile, like a rookie who hadn't learned the chorus. "You want me to pull a team off an active sector to repaint a door for your conscience, Sergeant?" "I want you to reopen the record," I said. "Interview Bravo, 8. Cross-check the time." The boy we pulled out, he had a doll with the same initial. He said. I stopped, because the boy's words were for me, not for Hart, and saying them here felt like setting something holy on the floor. He said what? Hart asked, and the shape of his mouth around the question was all procedure. "That there's a girl," I said. "And that I'd find her." He stared for a beat, then gestured to the chair. I didn't sit. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I get it," he said. "You're still in the scene. We all are. But we can't chase ghosts because some kid clutched a toy." "Her name is stitched into the toy," I said. "And I found her bad exit. We missed it." He tapped the desk with 2 fingers. "A small, patient rhythm. File a supplemental. I'll forward to operations. They'll triage it." "Triage," I repeated. "She's not a wound, sir." "Everything is, right now," he said, and gave me the smile bureaucrats use when they're about to close a door. "Go get some sleep." I left before my mouth got me demoted. In the hallway, the hum of freezers and servers sounded like a nest of insects. The clerk had put a styrofoam cup of coffee near my terminal. The surface had skinned. I sat, reopened the record, and drilled deeper. Bravo 8's roster populated the screen with gray silhouettes and last names. I clicked the leader, Santos. The chain below showed timestamps, 13:55, arrive sector. 14:08, door breach 2 houses south. 14:29, assist civilian evacuation 2 houses north. 14:32, 229 Jackson cleared. 14:40, move east. For actions in 37 minutes, with a pause for an evacuation? It didn't fit inside the physics of the day. I zoomed in on the sector map. A thin red line had been drawn around an area 2 blocks wide, unsafe structural, limit entry. 229 Jackson's. Sat just inside the line in one version of the map, outside it in another. I toggled layers. The dot jumped a few feet each time, like it was trying to avoid being pinned. Someone had uploaded 2 copies of the same map with different boundaries. One timestamped at 12:20. The other at 14:50. The 12:20 map made her house fall inside the limited entry zone. The 14:50 map moved the boundary east, freeing the address for search, 20 minutes after someone had already logged it cleared. I took a breath through my teeth. The bracelet felt heavier in my pocket now, like it had gathered weight from the page. I printed both maps, the machine coughing them out in jittering swallows. I wrote the times in pen at the top. 12:20, 14:50. I tucked them into a folder and stood just as someone parted the trailer flap. "Sergeant?" The doctor from the infirmary. She held the curtain open with an elbow, the other hand snug around a file. "The boy asked for you." My anger loosened its tie. Now, she said. Her face had that cautious softness professionals put on when feeling would slow their hands. In the tent, he was as I'd left him, only smaller somehow, the way night shrinks everything. The doll was a shadow under his chin. The rain was quieter here, the world felt farther away. He watched me approach like I was a sound he was trying to place. I crouched. "Hey," I said, and it felt like too much noise. "I'm here." He worked his jaw, searching for air between words. "You looked," he said. Not a question. I did. His gaze flicked to the canvas wall, away, back again. She said, "Don't trust uniforms." The last word took him time, as if each letter had to be negotiated with. She said, "They skipped our house." The tent, the camp, my bones, everything went still. I kept my face even because children watch your eyes more than your mouth. I nodded once. "Okay." He blinked. A single tear balanced on the lower lid, refused to fall. He pressed his thumb to the doll's wrist. Tap. 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 She said, "If I told you, you'd know which ones." The doctor watched from the corner, writing nothing, as if afraid the noise of a pen would change the shape of his words. I swallowed the taste of tin. Which ones? Maps, teams, signatures, the soft lies that slide into lines of a form until a life disappears behind a checkbox. "I'm going to fix the record," I said. The line came out flat, engineered not to tremble. "I'm going to fix it and I'm going to find her." He closed his eyes, a small bow. The doctor touched my shoulder as if reminding me where I was, who I was allowed to be in a room like this. Outside, the sky had turned the color of old water. I walked back to the records trailer holding the boy's sentence like a lit match cupped against wind. The clerk had switched off 2 of the overhead lights, the room had entered its own twilight. I scanned the maps to PDF, attached them to a supplemental report, and flagged it urgent. The system assigned it a number I knew would vanish into the belly of a queue unless someone wanted it not to. I printed 1 extra copy of everything. Paper is harder to erase than a screen. I slid the pages into a manila envelope and wrote my name across the tab. A small, defiant act, like carving a letter into plastic skin. As I left, I paused at the door. The fluorescent light hummed. The printer tray was ajar, a corner of paper jutting out like a tongue. I pushed it in with 1 finger. Back at the infirmary, I stood outside the tent flap, listening. The rain had turned to a whisper. From inside, I could hear it, soft as a heartbeat, steady as guilt. Tap. 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 I let the sound settle in my chest. Then I slipped the envelope into my jacket and walked toward the dark where the decisions were made. The doll lay on the folding table under the harsh light of the supply tent, a charred little witness surrounded by rolls of gauze and bottles of iodine. Someone had tagged it with a white evidence slip, the word property scrawled above an empty line. No one had bothered to fill it in. I pulled a chair close, the metal legs screeching across the plywood floor. The smell here was a strange mix of antiseptic and wet earth, a reminder that even clean places carry the scent of where they've been. The dress, once pink, had faded into something between smoke and bone. My gloves felt too clumsy, so I peeled them off and traced the seams with bare fingers. The fabric was brittle, like old paper left in the sun. Threads curled away from the edges, melted and hardened into tiny glassy beads. The stitching along the arm was different, tighter, rougher, the kind of repair done in a hurry with whatever thread was at hand. I slid my finger along it, feeling each knot like a pulse. That's when I felt it, a lump under the seam, not part of the doll's shape. I looked around. The tent was empty, the hum of the generator outside filling the space between breaths. I took the small trauma shears from a nearby tray and slid the blades carefully into the seam. The thread resisted, then gave way with a soft sigh. Inside, the stuffing was gray and matted, clinging to my fingertips. I eased it aside, the way you might part tall grass looking for a lost path. Something thin and stiff emerged, folded paper, edges curled, the ink bled by time and water. It was a drawing. 2 houses, sketched in a child's uneven lines. One had a jagged roof and a small square window, the other was taller, with a chimney spitting smoke that drifted toward the first. Between them, a dotted line connected the doors, looping once before reaching its end. At the bottom, in smaller, shakier letters. Find the house near the trees. She's there. My chest tightened. The dotted line wasn't just decoration, it was a path. A map. And the chimney house. I'd seen it before. Not in person, but on the sector maps. It sat on the edge of a restricted zone, in an area never marked for search. The paper was soft from water damage, but a faint scent clung to it, smoke and something sweeter, like old crayons. I folded it back into the doll, sealing the seam with my fingers. The act felt wrong, like sending someone back into hiding. I heard footsteps outside and slid the doll into my jacket. The tent flap rustled as a young quartermaster stepped in, balancing a clipboard and a box of gloves. Need something, Sergeant? No, I said, standing. Just checking supplies. I left before he could look too closely. The drive out toward the restricted zone was long and half forbidden. I didn't check out a vehicle through proper channels, didn't want a record of where I was going, so I took one from the row of decommissioned trucks awaiting repairs. The windshield was spidered on the passenger side, and the wipers squealed like a bad alibi. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, beating on the glass as the city gave way to skeletal suburbs. Houses here sagged into themselves, roofs caving under the weight of soaked insulation. The air smelled of mold and burnt wires. I followed the memory of the drawing, counting intersections until I saw it, a narrow gravel road lined with trees stripped nearly bare. At the end stood the house from the picture, tall, chimney intact, its siding warped but still standing. The front door hung crooked, one hinge rusted through. I stepped inside, the floor groaning under my weight. The air was colder here, as if the walls had been holding their breath for days. Dust and ash swirled in my flashlight's beam. I moved through the room slowly, kitchen first, where a plate still sat on the counter, its edge rimmed with mold. A single fork lay beside it, teeth bent. In the living room, a couch had been pushed against the wall, its cushions slashed open. The fireplace was filled with wet ash, the remnants of something burned long after the disaster. In the corner, near the back door, a child's rain boot leaned against the wall. Small. Yellow once, now the color of wet clay. The basement door was unlocked. I opened it, the hinges screaming, and descended into the dark. At the bottom was a freezer, white, dented, unplugged. My breath caught before I even lifted the lid. Inside, no food. Just a folded blanket, a dented tin of crackers, and an empty plastic water bottle. The blanket smelled faintly of smoke and something else, soap, maybe. A bracelet lay in the corner of the freezer, half buried under crumbs. Not the same as the one I'd found in the collapsed house, but close. This one had no engraving, just a small clasp bent out of shape. There was no sign of her. No body, no note, just the ghost of someone who'd been here long enough to wait. I sat on the basement steps for a moment, the cold from the concrete seeping through my boots. The drawing burned in my mind, the dotted line ending here. But it was too late. The line had ended days ago. Still, something about the room felt wrong. Too neat. Whoever had left had done so deliberately, taking only what they could carry. Which meant she'd walked out of here alive. I closed the freezer, stood, and took one last look at the room. A single handprint smudged the wall by the door, small enough to fit inside my palm. I touched it, feeling nothing but cold paint, and whispered into the still air. "I'm coming." Outside, the rain had stopped, but the clouds hung low, pressing the world down. I started the truck, the doll in my jacket a quiet weight against my ribs. The dotted line wasn't finished. It just changed direction. The house breathed in drafts, that hollow kind of air you only hear after sirens have stopped. Every window wore a skin of ash. My footprints made ovals in the soot, a trail that felt too loud for a place that had taught itself to be quiet. I stood at the top of the basement stairs again, hand on the splintered rail. The thin pull of cold rose to meet me, a long exhale from a mouth that didn't want to open. I clicked my flashlight and took the steps one at a time, counting under breath. 7, 8, 9, numbers that felt like apologies. The freezer waited in the corner where the concrete wept. White once. Now smudged by palms and heel marks, edges bruised, the rubber gasket gaped like a wound that wouldn't close. An unplugged cord lay like a dead snake on the floor. On the mantel above the cold fireplace, a photograph lay face down. I turned it over. 3 people grinned into summer, a man with grease under his nails holding a grill fork like a scepter, a woman in sunglasses caught between a laugh and a warning, and a girl whose eyes were squinted cameras aimed at the person behind the lens. In the corner, a dog tongue blurred mid-lick. I didn't know their names yet. I only knew the absence in the room wore all of their shapes. In the kitchen, the faucet had been wrapped with duct tape to stop a leak. The tape had a little tail where the tearing had gone crooked. That small imperfection broke me in a way the wreckage hadn't, the evidence of a tired kindness, of someone fixing what they could, while larger breaks were on the way. I took the stairs 2 at a time back down, because movement kept the noise of my head from expanding. At the bottom, I knelt by the freezer again and let my palm rest on its lid. It was cold with disuse. I imagined her curled inside, not dead but making herself smaller to survive the sound of heavy boots on the floor above. The unplugged freezer wasn't a coffin, it was a bunker. The rubber seal made a quiet world where breathing might not betray you. The marks told me the rest. 14 days. Then 3 more. Then, something. The end of the pen. The end of the crackers. The end of waiting. I sank onto the floor. The concrete stole heat from me like it had been hired to. I pressed my knuckles to my eyes until stars showed up, a cheap constellation too bright to mean anything. The helplessness had a shape I recognized, a door you'd checked, a room you'd walked past, a name you'd written down as if ink were proof of care. In my head, procedures lined up, who to call, what form to escalate, what cadence of language gets a lock turned by the right hand. But none of that made the air warmer in this room. None of it put food back into the tin. None of it returned the days her marks had paid. My chest folded in on itself. I didn't drop the way people do in movies, no drama, no shout. My knees went to the floor as if the room had been tilted in that direction and resisting was impolite. My forehead found the back of my wrist resting on the freezer lid. I stayed like that, a bowed figure making a small prayer to a mute machine. I'm sorry, I told a box that couldn't hear me, and the sentence didn't have a subject because it was for everyone, for her, for the boy, for the map that moved lines to erase houses, for my own boots that hadn't been here sooner. After a time I couldn't measure, I stood. The body knows when to stop bleeding in public, even when the room has no audience. I wiped my wrist against my jacket, lifted the blanket, and folded it back into the cavity of the freezer as carefully as hands can perform penance. I set the tin and the bottle the way she must have, the order of them a private arithmetic I didn't dare scramble. On my way up, I paused on the third stair. There, at ankle height on the riser, was another S, drawn with what might have been soot and spit, the curve a child's steady defiance. The letter looked less like a name now and more like a compass that only pointed inward. I shut the basement door softly, as if the quiet she made here could still be preserved. Outside, dusk had shaved the edges off the world. The trees were silhouettes sewing the house to the sky. My truck ticked as it cooled. Somewhere far off, a generator coughed like an old man clearing his throat. At the threshold, I took one last look over my shoulder. The room held its stillness tight. The freezer sat where it had sat for 3 weeks, waiting like an altar no one knew to visit. On the sill, ash motes rose and fell in a crooked beam of dying light, turning the air into slow snow. I closed the door and let the latch catch. Too Late traveled with me down the steps, into the yard, across the gravel, an invisible weight riding shotgun. The doll knocked once against my ribs when I slid into the truck, as if to remind me it had more to say. I started the engine and watched the house in the rearview. It didn't get smaller the way objects do when you drive away. It stayed the same size inside me. Somewhere behind the trees, something tapped 3 times. Or maybe it was only a branch against a window. Either way, the sound followed me into the dark. The infirmary tent smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain-soaked canvas, the kind of damp that seemed to cling to every corner of camp no matter how many heaters we ran. I pushed the flap aside and saw him, same cot, same posture, same doll pressed to his chest. Only this time, there was paper on his lap. He wasn't looking at me when I approached. His head was bent low, a pencil clutched in his hand like it might slip away if he loosened his grip. The line he drew was slow, careful. Hesitation in every stroke. I pulled up the same metal stool as before, letting it scrape across the plywood announce me. "What are you working on?" I asked, not expecting an answer. The boy didn't speak, but his eyes flicked up for the briefest second, like a signal that I could watch, but not yet touch the meaning. The page held the outline of a house. Not just any house, tall, narrow, chimney leaning a little to the left. The same one from the drawing I'd pulled out of the doll. Around it, he'd started adding trees, their trunks just 2 parallel lines, leaves sketched in quick cloud shapes. I watched as he added a window to the top floor. In the square, he drew a girl. Not a stick figure, more than that. She had hair that fell to her shoulders, a round face with 2 dots for eyes, and a mouth that was just a short line. No smile. No frown. Just, waiting. "She looks familiar," I said. His hand paused for half a heartbeat, then kept moving. He shaded the window darker, leaving only her outline white against it. "You've seen her?" I asked. This time, he nodded, barely, as if the motion cost him something. I waited. I'd learned with him that rushing a silence was the quickest way to lose it. When he finished the shading, he tapped the page 3 times. Tap. 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 The same rhythm he gave the doll's wrist in the cot. My stomach tightened. "Is that her?" I asked softly. "The one you told me about?" Another nod. He flipped the paper over and began again, this time, drawing 2 houses side by side. He connected them with a dotted line, looping it just like in the hidden note I'd found. On the taller house, the girl at the window. On the smaller, empty windows, but smoke curling from the chimney. I pointed at the dotted line. Is this the way between them? The boy's pencil stopped above the page. He didn't nod or shake his head. Instead, he pointed at the girl in the taller house, then at me. She wanted me to find her, I said. He dropped the pencil. It rolled toward me, leaving a faint gray trail across the paper. I picked it up and set it beside him. I went there, I said. I saw where she stayed. His eyes locked on mine for the first time since the rubble. They were steady, unblinking, like he was measuring the truth in my words. She's not there anymore, I admitted. But I know she made it out. I saw the signs. His lip trembled once, almost imperceptibly. Then he turned to the small tray beside his cot and pulled out another piece of paper. It was folded into quarters, edges softened by handling. He handed it to me without a word. I unfolded it carefully. Another drawing, but this one was different. The same girl, but standing outside now, beside a tree. She held the doll in one arm. The other hand was reaching toward someone drawn only as a pair of boots and the edge of a coat. My coat. The line of her mouth was the same, flat, unreadable. But the hand reaching out carried all the weight in the picture. You think she's still looking for me, I said. He blinked slowly, then reached for the doll, placing it gently in my lap. His fingers tapped 3 times against its arm. Tap. 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 Is that where she is now? I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to his first drawing and began adding to it. Around the house with the girl, he drew fence posts, 8 of them, evenly spaced. Behind the trees, he added shapes that could have been hills or maybe the edges of other buildings. I watched in silence, memorizing every line. This wasn't just a picture, it was a map disguised as a memory. The doctor stepped in then, checking her clipboard. He's been calmer since this morning, she said quietly to me. More, focused. I nodded toward the drawings. This is focus. When she left, I leaned closer to him. Can you show me where the fence is? He studied me, then set the pencil down and curled back around the doll. Conversation over. I took that as my cue to go. But as I stood, he reached out and caught my sleeve between 2 fingers. Just a small tug. I looked down. He didn't speak, just pointed to the window of the tent, where rain was starting again, slow at first. Then he tapped the cot's frame 3 times. Tap. 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 I'll listen, I said. Outside, the camp seemed smaller under the weight of the storm. I ducked into the comms tent and found an unused table. I spread the boy's drawings beside the hidden one from the doll, lining them up. The dotted paths matched perfectly. The fence posts were new, but the direction was the same. I traced the loop with my finger, feeling the weight of what it meant. She hadn't been hiding at random. She'd been moving toward something, or someone. And the boy knew exactly where. The rain followed me into the records trailer, dripping off my jacket in slow, cold taps onto the plywood floor. I ignored the puddle forming at my boots and spread the boy's drawings across the desk, smoothing the paper flat with the side of my hand. 2 houses. A dotted line. The fence posts. I opened the terminal and pulled up the restricted access database, maps drawn up before the rescue operations began. Not the versions the public saw, but the ones marked for internal use only. The ones that decided which streets got boots on the ground first, and which didn't. The monitor hummed and blinked to life. Sector 7B. Overlay with hazard zones. There, just where the dotted line curved on the boy's map, sat the tall, chimneyed house. On this official map, it was shaded red. Not unsearched, not pending. Red meant no entry. Structural hazard. I toggled an older backup. Same house, but no red shading. A handwritten note in the margin, pending review, FZ reassessment. 2 versions of the same map, drawn less than an hour apart. I leaned back, rainwater sliding down my neck. My gut told me what my head didn't want to say out loud: this wasn't a clerical error. This was deliberate. Someone had drawn a line around that house, locked it away behind a code, and left it to be erased. I dug deeper, pulling up the clearance logs for the surrounding area. The neighboring houses had been searched and marked within hours of the disaster. But hers? Skipped, marked unsafe without a structural report, and, most telling, signed off by someone in logistics, not structural engineering. The name under that signature, R. Carver. The same name stamped on a procurement order I'd seen earlier for emergency supply contracts. The same name that had passed across the mayor's desk during a closed-door meeting I wasn't supposed to overhear. I printed both versions of the map, side by side, the paper curling in my damp hands. The boy's drawing sat between them like a bridge, connecting what the official record erased to what a child's memory refused to forget. The more I stared, the more details emerged. The fence posts on his drawing? They matched the old perimeter markers used when the zone was originally surveyed. They'd been moved in the newer maps, shifting the boundary just enough to keep that house, and whatever was in it, out of reach. It wasn't a hazard perimeter. It was a wall. The sound of boots behind me pulled me out of my thoughts. I turned to see Reyes from logistics, clipboard in hand, smile too polite to mean nothing. "You're in the restricted archive," she said. Not accusing, not friendly. Just noting. I needed cross-reference on hazard zone discrepancies, I said, keeping my tone even. Looking at older layers for accuracy. She nodded slowly, eyes flicking to the papers on my desk. "Careful with those. Some of the drafts never got approved for a reason." "Yeah," I said. "I'm starting to figure out the reason." Her smile didn't move, but her eyes sharpened. "Just make sure what you figure out matches what's on record." She turned and left, the tent flap shuddering in her wake. I didn't wait. I slid the maps and the boy's drawings into a folder, tucked it under my arm, and left for the comms tent. There was one person I could trust to look at this and not file it in the nearest shredder: Olson, a field surveyor who owed me more than one favor. He met me halfway across camp, mud clinging to his boots. "What's with the look?" he asked. "I need you to confirm something," I said, pulling him into the shadow of a supply crate. I opened the folder, showing him the maps. Hazard perimeter on the left. Adjusted perimeter on the right. Same timestamp day, different access codes. His brow furrowed. "That's not an adjustment. That's a redraft. You don't redraw a hazard zone unless you've got engineering review, and that's not engineering review. That's logistics override." "Carver," I said. Olson's lips thinned. "That's bad company." "Bad enough to skip a house entirely," I said, flipping to the boy's drawing. "And this? He's got the original perimeter right here. Didn't even know it." He studied the sketch. "Kids don't forget fences," he murmured. "They're the lines they're told not to cross." I closed the folder. I think she was kept inside that red zone on purpose. Not because it was dangerous, but because someone wanted her unreachable. Olson looked around the camp, then leaned in. "If that's true, you're in over your head. And if you keep digging, you're going to find yourself reassigned before you can breathe on the truth." "I already found something," I said. "And I'm not breathing easy either way." That night, I sat on my cot in the dark, the folder open in my lap. The rain on the tent roof was steady, no longer tapping but drumming, a warning or a countdown, I couldn't tell which. The boy's drawings lay on top. The dotted line from one house to another. The girl in the window. The fence posts marking the edge of safety, or the start of a cage. Maps are supposed to tell the truth of a place. These ones had been rewritten to lie. And I had the proof in my hands. The logistics tent smelled like stale coffee and printer toner, the kind of air that makes people forget they're still breathing. It was late, most of the camp was asleep, but the place still hummed with the quiet shuffle of papers and the muted tap of keys. Carver's desk sat at the far end, a small fortress of binders and stacked clipboards. He was there, sleeves rolled up, a pen chewing the edge of his lip. He didn't notice me until my shadow cut across his desk. "You redrew the line," I said. He didn't look up right away, just signed something with deliberate care before capping his pen. "You'll have to be more specific, Sergeant." I dropped the folder onto his desk. The map slid out, the boy's drawing landing on top like a challenge. Original perimeter. Adjusted perimeter. Same day. Same sector. No engineering report. Carver finally met my eyes, his expression so bland it could have been carved from ice. Sometimes hazard zones shift. Sometimes data comes in late. You know how it is. I know logistics doesn't have the authority to override a hazard classification, I said. And yet here we are. He glanced at the boy's drawing, then pushed it aside with 2 fingers, like it was an insect. "You've been busy. There was a girl in that house, Carver. You made sure no one went in." He leaned back, folding his hands. "Careful. I'm already past careful." He sighed, a sound too soft to mean regret. "You want the truth? Fine. That hazard house belonged to a whistleblower. Her mother filed complaints about procurement contracts last year, said supplies were being diverted, rescue zones reduced to cut costs. She sent evidence to the state. Made enemies in all the right places. And the girl?" I asked. "The mother vanished a week before the flood. The father, well, let's just say he understood how to keep doors shut. The daughter was an inconvenience. And when the water came, he gestured vaguely at the map. Some zones didn't need saving." My jaw tightened until I heard it click. "You skipped them on purpose." His eyes stayed on mine. "We saved who we could. The rest wasn't worth the fallout. You left a child to die." Carver's smile was thin and unshaken. "No, Sergeant. We left her to be forgotten. It's not the same thing." I stepped closer, close enough to smell the bitter coffee on his breath. "She's not forgotten. And the boy remembers everything." His gaze flicked toward the tent flap, checking for witnesses. "If you like your career, you'll keep the boy out of this. No one will believe him. No one will believe you. Then why are you nervous?" I asked. The smile faltered, just for a breath, but enough. He leaned forward. "We have an understanding in this camp. Everyone plays their part, everyone goes home. Break that, and you won't be standing in a tent having this conversation. You'll be gone before sunrise." It was a threat, but the kind that wore a handshake instead of a knife. I left before I did something I couldn't take back. The night air hit me sharp, the camp lights blurring in the mist. I walked without direction, my boots sinking into the soft ground, until I found myself back at the infirmary. The boy was asleep, his hand still resting on the doll like it was the anchor keeping him from drifting off the edge of the world. I stood there, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, and thought about what Carver had said, how some zones didn't need saving. The curtain shifted, and the doctor appeared beside me, her voice low. "You look like you're carrying something heavy." "I am." She didn't ask what. Maybe she already knew. In the mess tent, I found Olson hunched over a cup of black coffee that steamed faintly in the cold. I slid the folder across to him. "You were right. This was deliberate." He flipped through the pages, his face hardening. And they want me quiet." Olson closed the folder and pushed it back. "You think telling anyone in this camp will change a thing? They'll circle the wagons faster than you can open your mouth. I sat across from him. So what? We just let them bury her story? He hesitated, then leaned in. If you want this to go anywhere, you take it out of their hands. Off the record. Somewhere the chain of command can't smother it. You mean the press? He gave the smallest nod. It's the only way this doesn't die here. Later, back in my tent, I opened the folder again. The boy's drawing lay on top, the girl in the window watching me with that unreadable mouth. I thought of Carver's voice, smooth, unhurried, convinced of his own safety. I thought of the scratches in the freezer, the penciled rabbit on the wall, the 3 taps on the cot frame. The silence around her wasn't just neglect. It was a choice. An agreement made in closed rooms between men with neat signatures. The kind of silence that keeps you alive if you join it. The kind that kills you if you're on the other side. The boy's drawings were still on my desk when the camp woke to another gray morning, the kind where light never really arrives, just a lighter shade of shadow. I traced the dotted line with my finger again, following it past the fence posts, past the trees he'd drawn in uneven clusters. I'd stared at them long enough to know they weren't just decoration. The spacing was deliberate. Not a child's guess at where trees might be, but a memory of where they stood. There was only one stretch of Sector 7B where trees grew like that, a patch of woodland beyond the hazard perimeter, untouched by rescue teams. Not because it was dangerous, but because it wasn't profitable to clear. I'd heard that phrase once in a budget meeting. Never thought it would be applied to human lives. I didn't check out a vehicle this time. I just took one. No log entry, no signature. If I was going to find her, I couldn't leave a trail the wrong people could follow. The forest was a wet skeleton, bare branches clawing at the sky, ground softened by weeks of rain. The truck sank into the ruts of an old service road, tires kicking mud up onto the doors. When the path ended, I went on foot, following the shape of the boy's dotted line in my head. It was quiet here, not the silence of an empty room, but the kind that waits for you to break it. Every step felt like I was intruding. 20 minutes in, I saw it, a rusted RV half hidden between 2 leaning pines. Moss had crept up its sides, and one of the windows was broken, the curtain inside fluttering like a slow heartbeat. I circled it first. No tire tracks, no fresh footprints in the mud. At the rear, a strip of duct tape flapped against the siding, the words scrawled in faded marker barely legible, "Too late." Inside smelled of damp and metal, the air thick with that faint, sour trace of somewhere someone once lived. A blanket lay crumpled in the corner, a pair of small shoes beside it, mud still clinging to the soles. On the tiny table, under a layer of dust, sat an old audio recorder. The kind with physical buttons that clicked. A half-spent battery rolled beside it. I pressed play. Static filled the space, then a faint voice. A child's. 1, 2, 3, a pause. A soft cough. 4, 5, 6. The counting went on, broken occasionally by the sound of tapping, 3 in a row, just like the boy. Sometimes the voice drifted into humming, sometimes into silence long enough to make me think the tape had ended. Then, days later by her own count, her voice wavered, "No more crackers. Just water. It's okay. He said he'd come." More silence. A sigh. "I think he's late." The tape clicked off. I sat there for a long while, the recorder heavy in my hand, her voice still echoing in the close air of the RV. She'd been here. Alive. Waiting. And if the boy's map was right, this was only one stop on her trail. I checked the shelves above the table, empty except for a bent tin spoon and a crumpled page torn from a notebook. On it, drawn in quick pencil lines, was the same tall house, the same chimney. But now the dotted line extended beyond it, into a jagged shape that might have been the edge of a forest. Underneath, in smaller, shakier writing, follow the pines. Outside, the trees shifted in the wind, branches knocking together like bones. I took one last sweep of the RV, then stepped back into the cold. A few yards from the door, something caught the light, half buried in the wet leaves. I knelt and brushed it free. A hair clip. Plastic, cracked along one side, painted with tiny white flowers. I slid it into my pocket beside the boy's folded drawing. 2 anchors now. 2 points that made the line between them impossible to ignore. I made it back to the truck as the clouds split just enough for a thread of weak light to fall through. It caught the edge of the windshield, and for a second, I thought I saw her there, just a trick of shadow and memory, watching from the tree lean, head tilted, mouth that unreadable flat line. When I looked again, the space was empty. Back in camp, I didn't go straight to Carver or to anyone in logistics. I went to the comms tent, closed the flap, and copied the recording to a drive small enough to slip into my boot. I labeled it with nothing but the date. If they wanted silence, I'd keep the talking off their channels. The boy was awake when I returned to the infirmary. I sat on the stool, pulled the hair clip from my pocket, and set it gently on the edge of his blanket. His fingers hovered over it, not touching at first, just looking, as if he were making sure it was real. Then he closed his hand around it, eyes lifting to mine. "She left it," I said. He didn't speak, but he nodded once, the movement slow, deliberate. His other hand tapped the cot's frame. Tap. 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 "I found her voice," I said quietly. "She's out there." His grip tightened around the clip, and though his mouth stayed silent, his eyes said what neither of us could risk putting into words. "Then go get her." The camp was quieter than usual, like the storm from the night before had wrung the sound out of it. No shouting across supply lines, no clatter of tools. Just the low hum of generators and the occasional cough carried on damp air. Perfect for slipping through unnoticed. I'd already decided, the recording couldn't stay here. Not with Carver. Not with the mayor's office. If it went through official channels, it would die in a locked drawer before anyone outside Sector 7B even knew it existed. I needed someone who could make it impossible to bury. I'd met Reynolds 2 years ago, during a search and rescue op in a collapsed mine. She was a field reporter then, unafraid to wedge herself into dangerous spaces for the truth. Now she ran an independent channel that lived in the cracks between local and national news, too loud to ignore, too small for the bigger networks to control. I sent her one message on an encrypted app: "Need to meet. Urgent. Off the record." Her reply came 5 minutes later: "Where?" I chose a fuel depot outside the camp's perimeter. Neutral ground. Fewer eyes. She was already there when I arrived, leaning against the hood of her beat-up sedan, camera bag slung over one shoulder. Her hair was damp from the fog, and her eyes scanned the horizon like she expected company. "You look like hell," she said when I stepped out of the truck. "Been sightseeing," I said. "Come on." We sat inside her car, windows fogging almost instantly. I slid the drive across the console. "Play it." She plugged it into a battered laptop. The static filled the cabin first, then the girl's voice, counting, tapping, whispering about the crackers running out. When it ended, Reynolds leaned back, exhaling slowly. Jesus. How long was she in there? 17 days, by her count. And this was in your sector? I nodded. Marked as a hazard zone. Never searched. On purpose. She studied me, measuring the weight of my words. You can prove that? I pulled the maps from my jacket, spreading them over the center console. 2 versions. Same day. One keeps her house inside the hazard boundary. The other moves it just enough to exclude it. And the boy's drawings match the original perimeter. She ran her fingers over the paper like she was trying to feel the lie in the ink. Who signed off? R. Carver. Logistics chief. Direct line to the mayor's office. Reynolds whistled under her breath. You realize if I run this, you're finished here. I was finished the second I asked questions, I said. She nodded once, zipped the maps back into her bag, and powered down the laptop. Give me 12 hours. I'll make it loud enough that they can't just turn the volume down. Make sure the boy's face never shows, I said. Or hers, if you find her. You have my word. By the time I got back to camp, the sky was bruising into evening. I went straight to the infirmary. The boy was awake, drawing again, this time, something smaller. Just the girl's face. No house. No fence. He looked up when I came in. I sat on the stool and leaned forward. I gave her voice to someone who can make the whole world hear it, I said quietly. His pencil stilled. She'll be harder to hide now, I added. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then he tapped the cot's frame. Tap. 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 The broadcast hit just after midnight. I knew because my radio, usually a monotone parade of codes and coordinates, came alive with chatter that sounded half panicked, half stunned. I tuned to Reynolds's channel on my portable. Her voice was calm, deliberate. Tonight, we bring you the story of a girl left behind. Left not by accident, but by design. This is her voice. These are her words. And this is the proof that she was meant to disappear. Then came the recording, her counting, the taps, the small declarations of hope dissolving into doubt. The sound of someone learning in real time that help wasn't coming. Afterward, Reynolds explained the maps, the signatures, the altered perimeters. She never said my name, never showed the boy's face. But she made it clear, someone in authority had drawn a line and decided a child's life wasn't worth crossing it. The reaction was immediate. The generator hum was drowned by raised voices from the command tent. Radios barked orders that sounded less like disaster response and more like damage control. By morning, the mayor had issued a statement calling the broadcast misinformation and a manipulation of facts by disgruntled individuals. Carver was on every local channel, sitting too straight in his chair, talking about tragic misunderstandings and respect for operational boundaries. But the video was already everywhere. Shared, reposted, dissected. People in town were holding up printed stills from the broadcast, her map, her hand-drawn fence line, as if they were holy relics. Around midday, a soldier from admin appeared at my tent with a clipboard. Sergeant Daniel, you're relieved of duty pending review, he said without meeting my eyes. Review of what? I asked. Command will explain. They didn't. That evening, I walked back to the infirmary to tell the boy I was leaving. He was sitting cross-legged on the cot, the hair clip in one hand, the doll in the other. I won't be here tomorrow, I said. But that doesn't mean I'm done. His eyes stayed on the doll. Then, slowly, he reached out and placed it in my hand. A transfer, not a loan. She'll know I have this, I said. He nodded. And then, for the first time since I'd pulled him from the rubble, he spoke without prompting. Don't be late. That line carried me out of camp, past the perimeter lights, and into the dark road beyond. I didn't know where I'd go next. But I knew the whole town had heard her voice now. And the people who tried to erase her? They were starting to hear mine. The TV in the motel lobby was too loud for the size of the room, the kind of volume meant to force you into listening whether you wanted to or not. The front desk clerk didn't seem to mind, he was leaning back in his chair, eyes glued to the screen, a foam cup of coffee cooling on the counter. On the screen, under the banner special report, sat a man in a dark suit with a tie knotted too tightly at his throat. I recognized him instantly, even before the caption appeared, Richard Carver, Logistics Chief, Sector 7B. He wasn't alone. Seated beside him was another man, older, broad-shouldered, with the stiff posture of someone trying too hard to appear composed. The lower third read, Thomas Hale, parent of missing child. My stomach clenched. Parent. The interviewer was careful, voice low and sympathetic. Mr. Hale, there's been an outpouring of anger since last night's broadcast. What do you say to those who believe your daughter was left behind intentionally? Hale's jaw flexed before he spoke. It's a tragedy. But it's also a misunderstanding. My wife and I were told the house was unsafe. We were ordered to evacuate, and in the chaos, he looked down briefly, as if summoning sorrow from a place that had to be rehearsed. We thought she was already in safe hands. The clerk murmured something like poor guy, shaking his head. I stayed silent, watching Hale's hands on the desk in front of him. They didn't fidget. They didn't tremble. They just sat there, steady, practiced. The interviewer pressed gently. There are records suggesting the hazard zone was adjusted to exclude your house from search priority. Carver jumped in smoothly. Those are incomplete documents taken out of context. Decisions made in the middle of a disaster can look strange from the outside. But I assure you, no one here made a choice to abandon a child. I almost laughed. No one here. As if the maps and signatures had just appeared on their own. The broadcast cut to footage from the protests, people gathered outside City Hall, holding hand-lettered signs, "She was one of us." Where's the girl? No more red zones. Hale's face stayed composed. Carver's too. They were men who knew that as long as they sat in front of the right cameras, they could shape the air around their version of the truth. I turned away, pushing out into the chill evening. The motel's neon sign buzzed above me, its red letters flickering in and out like a dying heartbeat. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the boy. When I walked into the infirmary the next morning, the tent was dim, the air thick with that quiet hum of machines. He was on the cot, drawing again, but this time, it wasn't houses or fences. It was a face. Square jaw. Tight mouth. It took me a moment to realize it was Hale. I sat on the stool beside him. You've seen him before, I said. The boy's eyes flicked up, then down again. He shaded the man's eyes until they were nothing but dark ovals. When? I asked. His hand hesitated over the paper, then he pointed to the doll. She told you? He nodded. She said what? This time, he didn't tap or draw. He whispered, his voice rough from disuse, he locked the door. I stayed with him until the doctor came to check his vitals. When I left, my head was already 2 steps ahead, thinking about how to get that statement in front of someone who couldn't be bought or silenced. But there was a problem. Without the girl, without her voice live in a courtroom, it would be easy for Hale to claim the boy was confused. The boy wasn't confused. He remembered too much. By afternoon, Reynolds had sent me a message. You need to see this. Channel 4. Live. I found a diner with a TV above the counter. The volume was low, but the images spoke plenty. Hale was back on screen, this time alone. He was smiling, not the tight, pained smile from the earlier broadcast, but a wider one. The kind people wear when they think they're winning. My daughter is loved, he was saying. We've been working tirelessly with the authorities to locate her, and I'm confident she'll be found soon. But these allegations, these insinuations, are harmful. They take focus away from what matters, bringing her home. I felt my jaw clench. Bringing her home. As if home was a safe place for her. The diner's waitress shook her head, pouring coffee into a customer's cup. Poor man. Must be hell not knowing. I left a tip I couldn't afford and stepped back into the street. The air smelled faintly of rain, and somewhere far off, thunder muttered. That night, I sat on the edge of my motel bed, the boy's drawing of Hale in my hands. She'd told him enough to make sure he'd remember the right face. Carver might have been the one who moved the lines on the map, but Hale. Hale was the reason those lines were drawn in the first place. And now he was smiling into cameras, acting like the world had it all wrong. By the time the trial began, the town had already chosen sides. The courthouse steps were a collision of handmade signs, camera tripods, and the low murmur of people waiting for something to break open. Some had come to defend Hale, a father painted in the news as a victim of bad luck and worse bureaucracy. Others were there for her, the girl with no last name on the protest banners, the ghost who had counted days into a recorder no one was supposed to hear. I wasn't called to testify on the first day, so I sat in the back row, hands on my knees, watching the theater of it unfold. The prosecution started small, laying out the maps, the rescue logs, the timestamps. The jury watched quietly, eyes moving between the grainy perimeter diagrams and the signatures in ink. I recognized Carver's name before it was even read aloud. Then they brought in the boy. He was small in the witness chair, his feet not touching the floor, the doll resting on his lap like a shield. The courtroom was too big for him, every cough and shuffle magnified. The prosecutor asked if he remembered the house. He nodded. Did anyone else come to the house before the soldier did? The boy's voice was quiet, but clear, him. He pointed at Hale. The room stirred. Hale kept his eyes forward, jaw locked. What did he do when he was there? The boy's fingers tightened around the doll. Locked the door. Hale's lawyer objected, said it was hearsay from a child under trauma. The judge overruled, letting the boy's words hang in the air like a slow tolling bell. Then came the drawings. The prosecutor laid them out one by one, the tall house, the dotted line, the fence posts, the face shaded dark at the eyes. Who told you to draw this? The prosecutor asked. She did, the boy said, tapping the girl in the window with the eraser of his pencil. Said it would help him find her. He pointed at me in the back. The prosecutor turned to the jury. And he did. Hale was called next. He walked to the stand like a man headed into an interview he thought he could charm his way through. His suit was perfect, his hair trimmed with precision. Mr. Hale, the prosecutor began, did you ever instruct rescue teams to avoid your home? Of course not, he said smoothly. Did you have any involvement in altering the hazard perimeter that excluded your home from search priority? No. Do you recognize this map? Hale glanced at it, then nodded. Looks like one of the planning documents. And is this your signature at the bottom? A pause, half a beat too long. Yes. The prosecutor stepped closer. You signed off on moving the perimeter line. That change meant rescue teams never entered your home. And when asked why, your explanation was. I was told by Mr. Carver that it was unsafe. I trusted the experts. Unsafe for whom, Mr. Hale? The question landed heavier than the gavel. Midway through the afternoon, they called Carver. He wore the same bland face he'd given me in the logistics tent, but this time, the paper in front of him was not under his control. The prosecutor held up the audio recorder. Do you recognize this? Carver hesitated. No. Would it surprise you to know it was found in a location within the original perimeter of your hazard zone? That it contains the voice of the missing child? Carver shifted in his seat. If it's authentic, then yes, I'd be surprised. The prosecutor hit play. The counting filled the room, soft, steady, undeniable. A few jurors looked away. One woman wiped her eyes. Carver didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. On the third day, they called me. I walked past Hale on my way to the stand. His eyes flicked toward me once, quick as a blade. I swore in, sat, and told them everything, from the rubble, to the doll, to the freezer with its marks, to the RV in the forest. I laid out the maps. The changed perimeters. The boys' drawings. The defense tried to paint me as reckless, said I'd gone outside my orders, trespassed into restricted zones. They weren't wrong. I told them I'd do it again. When they asked why, I looked at the jury. Because every tap of her hand, every mark she made, said she was still worth finding. And the people who were supposed to protect her decided she wasn't. Near the end of the trial, something cracked. It wasn't in Hale, it was in his wife. She'd sat silent beside him the whole time, eyes forward, hands clasped. But on the fourth afternoon, during cross-examination, her voice broke. "They told us to leave her," she said suddenly, cutting across the lawyer's question. The room went still. The lawyer tried to rein her in. The judge told her to answer only what was asked. But she kept going. "They said it was better if she didn't come with us," she said, her voice trembling now. "Said she'd be a target. Said we could keep her safe by staying away." I believed them. Hale's head snapped toward her, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. "Who told you this?" the prosecutor asked. She hesitated. "Then, Carver. And my husband." The gavel's crack was sharp, but the words stayed in the air, hovering like dust motes in late sunlight. Outside, the crowd was already chanting before the jury went to deliberate. Inside, I sat in the back row again, the boy beside me, his small hand curled around the hair clip in his pocket. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Whatever the verdict, the truth was already out. And some things, once spoken, can't be made quiet again. A year can pass without feeling like it moved at all, just a long, gray road you walked without looking up. But this one had weight. Hale was in prison. Carver too. The charges, criminal negligence, obstruction of rescue, conspiracy, had been read in court like a list of debts finally collected. There was no celebration in the verdict, just a collective exhale, like the town had been holding its breath for far too long. The girl, she hadn't come back to this town. She'd been placed with a foster family 3 states away. The official line was safety, but I knew it was also distance from the streets where she had waited, and from the faces that had walked past her story until it was too late to pretend they hadn't seen it. I left the service not long after the trial. My last day, I handed in my ID badge, my sidearm, and a folder full of records I'd been told to dispose of but never did. Instead of turning them in, I passed them to Reynolds. Some truths don't belong in boxes. The idea for the center came from a drawing the boy made during one of our last visits. It was of a building with wide windows and a yard full of children, each holding a small flag. The words above it, in his uneven hand, "Safe place." So I built one. Not just for him, or for her, but for every kid who lived too close to the edges on a map. We called it the Rescue Zone. The building was nothing fancy, converted from an old fire station with peeling red doors and a tower we didn't need but kept anyway. The walls smelled faintly of brick dust and fresh paint. Inside, we had classrooms, cots, a storeroom stacked with food and water, and a small radio booth for kids to learn how to use emergency comms. The rule here was simple: no one is outside the rescue zone. On the first day we opened, the boy came with the doctor who'd cared for him. He was taller now, still quiet, but his eyes moved more. He sat at the back during the welcome talk, drawing on a piece of scrap paper. When the other kids went outside, he stayed behind and slipped the paper into my hand. It was a map. Not of streets this time, but of the center. The classrooms, the kitchen, the yard. In the middle, a dotted line connected every room. No dead ends. No locked doors. I kept teaching the survival basics: how to make a fire, how to signal for help, how to read a map even if someone tried to make it lie to you. The kids thought it was a game. That was fine. Games stick in the mind longer than lectures. On a rainy afternoon in late spring, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a letter written in careful block letters, the kind you make when you're still learning to trust your own hand. Dear Daniel. I'm okay. I have a dog now. His name is Scout. My new house has a fence, but you can open the gate from both sides. I drew you something. It's a new map. There are no red zones. Nowhere is outside the rescue zone. Taped to the bottom was the drawing, bright crayons this time, not pencil. Houses, trees, kids holding hands. And in the corner, a little doll with an S on its arm, smiling. That night, after the kids had gone home, I stood in the doorway of the center and listened to the rain. The street outside glistened under the lamps, and for a moment, I could almost hear it again, the faint tapping from a cot frame, the sound that had started it all. Tap. 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 It didn't hurt the same way anymore. It didn't accuse. It was just a reminder. Sometimes you arrive late. Sometimes you can't change that. But you can make sure the next time, there is no late. I locked up, slipped the letter into the folder where I kept the first drawing from the doll, and turned off the lights. The rescue zone sign glowed faintly in the dark, a small promise in the rain. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.